Hey guys, welcome back to No Paint No Gains. I'm Ray. This video is going to be a lot different from my previous videos in that it is not scripted, it is not really formatted. It'll just be me kind of rambling on about the Soulblight Gravelords army. So when I first started playing Age of Sigmar, I spent a lot of time looking up information about the different armies and how they played, and I didn't really find much in the hobby space where people talked about specifically what armies playstyle kind of was and what the units were. And while I did find some videos of people sort of saying, hey, here's how you can purchase units for your first 1,000 points, it, in my opinion, didn't really offer a lot of insight on like the versatility of the units or how it can grow from there. And some armies were great. Some videos were really good about explaining stuff for other armies. But for Soulblight Gravelords, I didn't necessarily find a whole lot. So this will be my take on a video where I'll talk a little bit about how the army sort of functions, some pros, some cons of the army. I'll talk about the different bloodlines and give you sort of a quick rundown of the playstyle of the different bloodlines. And then I'll also give my opinion on what I think would be a good sort of purchase starting point if you're somebody who's interested in starting a Soulblight Gravelords list. So without further ado, let's sort of jump into it. One thing that I think everybody should ask themselves before playing or picking up any Age of Sigmar army is the army that you're looking at right for you and who you are as a person? So we all have obviously different preferences and we all like to play the game a little differently. So if you're looking at Soulblight Gravelords, right, and you probably saw their ridiculous win rate, and you're like, wow, I want to win. Okay, well, you need to ask yourself, should you be playing Soulblight Gravelords, and are you going to enjoy the mechanism of the army that's going to lead to those wins? And to give you sort of my take on a description, if I had to describe the army, I would describe Soulblight Gravelords as a control horde army that utilizes strong hero synergies to empower and return units and overwhelm your opponent in the late game. So I would say that the biggest strength of Soulblight Gravelords, it's not that it's a hard-hitting army, so there's not a lot of natural hammers. If you're not very keen on gaming terminology, and I'm by no means a professional when it comes to a lot of these terms, but common terms that are thrown out that got me sort of confused when people were talking about it like all willy-nilly are things like hammers and anvils. So hammers are just going to be units that hit really hard and deal a lot of damage. Anvils are generally considered things that are, going to be sturdier, more defensive, that are going to be able to take a hit. So hammer and anvil. I mean, that might be obvious to some people, but for me, like, what the hell are they talking about? But something to sort of take into consideration, right? If you're looking to completely obliterate your opponent off the table, this might not be the army for you. If you're looking for an army that tends to be a little bit more versatile in their playstyle, but definitely sort of plays the long con and is playing for the late game, then this is an army that's definitely, in your ballpark there. So with that being said, I want to go over some positives and some negatives of the army. And again, these are my personal opinions. Everybody has their own take, but this is what I consider to be some of the positives. So first and foremost, Soulblight Gravelords does have a very versatile and deep model range. So what I mean by that is that the sculpts, so the way that the models are sort of built, are very versatile. They're very beautiful. They're really cool to look at. If you're really into vampires and zombies and skeletons and things like that, you will not be disappointed. They don't necessarily look outdated for the most part. There are a few models like the Grave Guard and the Black Knights that could use a little bit of love and some updates moving forward, but for the most parts, the models look really good on the tabletop. So their appearance is versatile and it's interesting. The versatility also kind of goes into the deep model range in that there's a variety of models to choose from, and they sort of work in a variety of different ways. They don't just all kind of do the same thing. They have sort of unique abilities and unique interactions that sort of makes it really interesting, to field them together on the battlefield and see how they work. Given that versatility in the model range, right, and how the models work, it leads over to a variety in list building. So this is one of the major attractions to me when I was looking at different armies for Age of Sigmar was, am I going to be able to put together different lists and have a different play experience with this army? I don't have a ton of disposable cash, so I can't just go out and buy a new army to get a different play experience every week, and nor do I have the time to build and paint a bunch of different armies. So having an army that allows for this versatility was really important to me, and I think Soulblight Gravelords does a great job with this. You do have an overarching theme that goes with the army, so as far as like having, you know, heroic vampires and leaders sort of shambling along and like ushering in a wave of death when it comes to like skeletons and zombie dogs and zombies in general, right? As they come into the rear and then clean up and decimate their enemies. That's like the overarching theme, right? But when it comes to the feel of the different lists that you can make and how they play, right, there's a lot of variety in it. So you won't get bored just by constantly playing the same army. And personally, you know, this is the one army that I own, like more than 2,000 points off, that I play almost every time I play Age of Sigmar. And I never get bored of it. I'm constantly putting together different lists, trying to test different things out, you know, maybe find something, some niche interaction that somebody else overlooked, or trying to use different units that are not as popular in the meta and see if they can be utilized in a, you know, in a new way that nobody's thought of. And it just keeps it interesting, and it keeps the game fun. A positive that I think could also be a negative, so it's double-sided, is it's a popular army. So what I mean by that is that it's not an army that is not going to be seen in tournaments, or it's not going to be seen in your local meta. You'll at least have one person, I would assume, to be playing Soulblight Gravelords. You're definitely going to see them at competitive events, especially with their crazy win rate currently. But with that being said, right, because it is popular, it means that Games Workshop is going to continue to provide updates for the army. They're going to continue to provide new sculpts, right? It's not something that they are going to just sort of leave in the back burner and then update 10 years later, or when 4th edition drops, you know, they're sort of being forced to update the line to keep up with the new rule set. But a negative of that popularity is that because it is popular, people will know how to play against it. So it's not uncommon for you to set up your army against somebody and go, hey, do you need me to explain how Soulblight works? And they go, no, I know how they work. And they already start developing sort of a counter strategy to you. Or you might go against a mirror match where you set down your army and they're like, oh, I'm also playing Soulblight. And you're like, oh, okay. And Soulblight versus Soulblight doesn't usually tend to be the most exciting of games. It's kind of, you know, you guys slapping each other with wet noodles for 2.5 hours and seeing who can win the battle of attrition. But that's just something to consider. If you're also somebody new who's picking up the army, because it is popular, you know, you could have other people who can kind of show you the ropes and give you some tips and tricks as it goes. And then one of my last positives here is that they have strong objective control and board presence. So because it is an army with very strong recursion, arguably the strongest recursion in the game, then you're not going to be necessarily pushed off objectives very easily, and you're not going to disappear from the board very easily. It's an army that definitely can go all 5 rounds in a match. It's an army that can definitely catch your opponents off guard if they're not, you know, wiping an entire unit off the table right away, and you just start slowly rebuilding their forces back up, just adding models. And, you know, even if they do wipe an entire unit, you're just like, well, surprise, I get to bring half of it back now. So you got to deal with, you know, here's 10 more zombies or 20 more zombies that are not going to be sitting in your back line or sitting in an objective. And, you know, it can get pretty annoying for them, but pretty great for you. So that's just something to consider. Now, it's not all rainbows and sunshine and butterflies. There are obviously some cons and negatives to the army. Biggest one for me that I would say is that it is a slow army. So armies like Nurgle and Soulblight are heavy combat armies, and as such, they do tend to be a little slow in the movement. And if you're new to Age of Sigmar, any experienced player, any player with like moderate experience will let you know that movement is very, very important. You know, fighting is fun and rolling dice is fun, but if you can't get to where you're trying to go, you're not going to have that fun. So a lot of your units tend to move fairly slow. Not all of them. You do have some cavalry units that move a decent pace, and some of your larger heroes, like a Vampire Lord, can move, I believe, 14 inches, and Neferata and Manfred, these named characters, can move like 16 inches and things like that. But they do have a point cost premium, so you're going to be paying a lot more points for those. But generally, most of your battle line, the things that you're bringing most often, which are going to be your zombies and skeletons and things like that, they only move 4 inches. So, you know, fairly slow, shambling horde sort of moving towards your enemy, but something to consider. Another negative that I would say is that the army has a lot of named heroes. So when you look at the composition of the models in the range, there are a lot of named heroes. Now, there's not a massive amount of hero characters like in Stormcast, where there's just an absurd amount of hero characters. But a downside that I would say is that there's very few unnamed generic heroes. And if you're wondering why that's a negative, it's because unnamed generic heroes do not gain the benefits of the seasonal battle pack. So what that means is that they don't get to use any of the sort of like new rules for the battle season. I'm not, you know, like for example, we're in the 2023-2024 battle pack as of the filming of this video. So they won't have access to any of the I forgot what they're called, but like the blizzard spells or the hoarfrost spells or whatever nonsense. They won't gain the Andorian locust keyword, I believe, or whatever it is. But they're generally sort of exempt from things like that, which can be a negative. Also, named heroes tend to be locked to a specific like faction or a specific bloodline. So if you try to transfer them between the bloodlines, they also won't gain the benefits of that bloodline. So while you still can't put them in that bloodline, it might limit the efficiency of that list because they're not getting the full benefits of the traits. So I think that's kind of a negative. You know, definitely would love to see more just generic vampire heroes, maybe even a vampire cavalry hero. I don't know why vampires can't ride on horses, but I think that would be a very cool thing to have. So fingers crossed for Age of Sigmar 4.0 next year. Maybe we'll get that. Okay, another negative leading on here can be that the army can be expensive. So if you're in the hobby, you know that all armies are expensive, but because this is sort of a horde and like or MSU, multiple small unit army, or it can be expensive in the amount of models you have to purchase. And not only that, but it can be expensive in the amount of time that you have to invest in order to build and paint and field the models as well. A very popular list currently is a list that runs anywhere from 120 to 160 zombies in the list, and that's a very well performing list, and you would hope so with that amount of wounds on the table and the amount of models on the table. But if you think about that, you know, 20 zombies can run you up to $50, how much money you're actually spending on that list if you're buying them at MSRP, or even if you're getting a discount on another retailer like Amazon or, you know, another online shop, it's still going to cost you a pretty penny. And that's not taking into account, again, heroes that you need to purchase in order to, you know, synergize with those units, the amount of time they needed to spend into painting them. So even if you're doing a very quick paint job, it's going to take you a while to build all those units. So it can be expensive. Not every list is like that, so keep that in mind. It's just one example of how we can go to the extreme edge, right? And something to consider. And then this is sort of a joke with a lot of Soulblight players. When we get to the shooting phase in any of our turns, we just kind of chuckle and go, haha, doesn't exist for us, and then we move forward. There's really no shooting in Soulblight. Some people be like, well, the Zombie Dragon has shooting, and like the Coven Throne or Blood Seeker Palanquin or something has shooting, I think. It's like, well, you know, at that point, we're just picking at, you know, threads here, basically. You might have, you know, a number of units that I can count in one hand that has maybe one shooting attack or things like that. So there's not really any shooting in the army. It is not meant to be a shooting army. It is definitely a melee combat oriented army. So if you're somebody who's looking to have a lot of, you know, range, power projection, this might not be something that, you know, meets your needs in that sense. So something to think about. How's it going so far?
Really good. I'm learning so much. Oh, baby.
Okay, so moving forward from this, I want to take a small second and then talk about the battle traits of the army. Now, because this isn't like an in-depth look, like a hardcore look at all the specific battle traits and the bloodlines and things like that, I kind of just want to give you a general breakdown of how you would go about understanding the composition of the Soulblight Gravelords book and how it sort of divides itself. So when you start building a Soulblight Gravelords army, every unit, right, for the most part, is going to benefit from these general battle traits. So these are the traits that are not locked to any specific bloodline. And when I say bloodline, I mean like sub-faction within the book. Okay, so every model or every unit is going to benefit from cursed bloodlines. That basically just means that you have to pick a bloodline. Endless legions, the unquiet dead, deathly invocations, and deathless minions. Now, as you specify which list you're going to build, right, you're going to have to select a cursed bloodline or a sub-faction. And there's 5. You have the Legion of Blood, the Legion of Night, Virkos, Avangori, and the Castelli bloodline. And now if you see here, every bloodline is going to have its own unique battle trait that is locked to that bloodline. So when you select generic units like a generic vampire lord, right, and you put that vampire lord in a Legion of Blood list, that vampire lord will also gain the unparalleled expertise. Got my little tongue tied there. The unparalleled expertise and the Coven of Nulamia battle traits. Okay, so if I put him in Virkos, then it gets the strength of the wolf is the pack and an infamous lineage. So that's kind of how that would work, and I think it's very like well organized for the book, and I think they did a good job on that. Now, talking about the generic battle traits, I'm going to give you a quick sort of, quick and dirty rundown of the battle traits. I'm not going to go into the full text detail about this. You can obviously, look this up on yourself further. You purchase the book if you decide to commit to the army, and you can read the full details on it. But I'll give you the basic idea of the sort of buffs and characteristics that your army is going to have. So first and foremost is Endless Legions. So Endless Legion is a battle trait that is going to return slain units at half strength on yours and your opponent's movement phase, specifically at the end of the movement phase. Now, this is where the strength of Soulblight really comes in, and this is where their major sort of recursion or the ability to return slain models is really felt, and it is, in my opinion, I think it's probably the strongest recursion in all of Age of Sigmar between, across all armies. So the way that this works is very simple. Let's say that you have a unit of 10 skeletons, and your opponent slays those 10 skeletons. Now, at the end of your movement phase, in the following phase, right, you roll a dice, and on a 3 or higher, you can return half of that unit or 5 skeletons back to the table for free. Should you fail, right, on your opponent's movement phase, you roll a dice, and on a 4 or higher, you can return half of that slain unit back to the table for free. Now, you can only do this once per slain unit, but if you have a unit of 30 skeletons, now you get 15 of them back for free. If you have a unit of 40 zombies and that gets slain, you get to add 20 zombies back on the table for free. So realistically, whenever you're looking at these summonable, so they have to have the summonable keyword, right? When you're looking at these summonable units and you look at the point cost, you're not spending the point cost for what they say. So like we have now 20 zombies cost 150 points. Well, realistically, you're paying 150 points for 30 zombies because you are going to bring back half of that slain unit, at some point in the game. So when you really think about it that way, it's pretty ridiculous the amount of value that you're getting point per unit cost. And then when you couple that with Deathly Invocation, so Deathly Invocation allows you to return slain summonable models back to a number of different units of your choosing. So your heroes, right, when they're within a certain radius of your summonable units, they can choose to either heal that unit a number of wounds, up to 3 wounds, or return a number of models back to that unit whose wound characteristic equals up to 3. So again, to break that down, let's say you have a unit of 10 skeletons and your opponent managed to kill off 5 of them. So now at the start of your hero phase, you could say, well, I have a vampire lord within a specified distance of those 5 skeletons. I'm just going to bring back 3 skeletons for free. So you get to add those 3 skeletons back to that unit. So you can kind of think of it, it's like a very cheeky rally for free. So you're constantly, adding in or healing your units, which can get really annoying for your opponents to deal with. Okay, so now we're going to move on to the Unquiet Dead. So the Unquiet Dead is our terrain feature battle trait. So it says, set up grave sites that allow for deep striking of summonable units. So you get these 4 terrain features. They're basically points on the table. You can mark them with a token or something, and you designate them as a grave site. You can place 2 in your deployment zone and then 2 anywhere else on the board. And what this allows you to do is it allows you to put units with the summonable keyword in reserve, so off the side of the board, and then at any point at the end of your movement phase, you can sort of bring in those units at a grave site. Granted, they have to be wholly within 12 inches of that grave site and more than 9 inches away from any enemy units. But this is really good if you want to have some sort of a deep strike or flanking maneuver set up. It's also great to protect some of your more valuable, like slow moving glass cannon units, like Grave Guard are infamous for being put in the grave site. And then praying that you make that 9-inch charge roll when they're brought up. But the cool thing about grave sites is that your opponent cannot destroy them, so they stay around the entire game, and you can play a lot of mind games with them. And you're sort of forcing your opponent, if they do want to deal with the grave sites, to sort of hang back and sort of zone out the grave sites, which also puts some of their units out of the game, out of combat or possibly off objectives. So at one point they have to pick, do they want to move forward and try to fight something, or move forward and contest an objective, or do they want to keep zoning that gravesite in their back line? So it's a great feature to have. And then we also have Deathless Minions. So Deathless Minions is pretty simple. Friendly Soulblight Gravelords units have a ward of 6 up. This basically means that your entire army has a 6 up ward. If you're not 100% certain what a ward is, it's basically another mechanic to try to mitigate or negate damage on a unit. So let's say a unit is about to take 5 points of damage. You would roll 1 dice for each damage being allocated to the unit. And if you get a 6 on that dice, then that damage is negated or ignored. So it's another great feature that sort of adds to your defensibility. So it really helps your model stick around on the table longer. And then finally, the Cursed Bloodline. This is our battle trait, our last battle trait. I mentioned this one a little bit earlier before. So it just says that, when you start building your army, you have to pick one of the Cursed Bloodlines or the sub-faction. And you have, again, those 5 sub-factions: the Legion of Blood, Legion of Night, Virkos, Castelai, and Navigori. And then upon picking that sub-faction, then you would gain their specific sub-faction or bloodline specific battle traits. Okay. The next thing I want to sort of talk about is just the spell lore. The Soulblight Gravelords book or army has 2 spell lores, the vampires and the death mages. So if you are to pick from the vampire spell lore, you have to need to the model needs to have the vampire and wizard keyword associated with it. And if they're going to pick spells from the death mages, then they need the wizard and death mage keyword associated with them. Now, something that I really like is that they sort of simplified the spell lore. So each spell lore only has 3 spells to pick from. Some of them are great, some of them are not so great, just like with any other spell lore. But I'll kind of run through the basics of each spell here. And then before I do, I just want to add that they do have sort of like a it's not an upcast, but like a power up mechanic built into the spells. So if you ever roll a natural 9 up on the dice, then the spell has like an empowered effect or something greater happens to it, which is kind of nice. It just kind of gives like a little spike in power, for the chosen spell that you're casting. So looking at the spell lore vampires here, we have Soul Pike, Vile Transference, and Spirit Gale. Oh, good old Spirit Gale. Okay, so let's start with Soul Pike. Soul Pike is effectively a spell that punishes a unit for charging into you. So when you cast it, you select an enemy unit, and when they charge into you, you roll a number of dice equal to their charge roll, and then for every 4 up, they suffer a mortal wound. Now, if you get an unmodified 9 or higher, you can choose up to 2 different enemy units within range instead of 1, which is nice. So if you have a enemy charging multiple units into you, right, they're effectively taking damage on their charge. So it's pretty cool there. Vile Transference lets you choose an enemy unit within range, and then you roll a number of dice equal to that unit's wound characteristic. So for every 5 or higher that you roll, that model is going to suffer a mortal wound, and then you are going to heal 1 wound. If you manage to cast that on a 9 or higher, then what's going to happen is it's going to be on a 4 up instead of a 5 up, the effect. Something to take note here is that we are looking at the unit's wound characteristic, not total wound count. So if you're thinking, wow, this is awesome to use against armies with big horde units, like if they have a group of 20 units, I'll roll 20 dice because there's 20 of them. That's not the case. You would roll generally 1 or 2 dice depending on the model wounds. So this spell is actually best used on large models with multiple wounds. So like if you use it on a Mega Gargant, they have 35 wounds, you would roll 35 dice. And then on a 5 up, they would take 1 mortal wound, and you would heal 1 wound to your caster. So that's actually great for, sort of whittling down large, heavy wounded creatures and models. And then finally, we have Spirit Gale, the updated Spirit Gale. Long missed will be the days of old Spirit Gale. So new Spirit Gale basically has you cast a spell, and if it's successful, then you choose 3 enemy units, and they suffer 1 mortal wound. If you manage to cast it on a 9 or higher, then you choose 6 enemy units, and they suffer 1 mortal wound. I have a lot of thoughts on this Spirit Gale. I think that they basically ruined the spell. I'm not going to get too much into it, but I think they ruined the spell. Old Spirit Gale, I know a lot of people had problems with it. So the old Spirit Gale was on a successful cast, every unit on the enemy team suffers 1 mortal wound, and if you roll it on a 9 or higher, then every unit takes 2 mortal wounds. And I could see how if you're somehow getting lucky in the dice and constantly casting 2 mortal wounds, that's depending on the number of the units that the enemy has, that's a lot of mortal wounds for a value 7 cast spell. So it's pretty wild. But Comet's Call still exists, and they could have sort of worked Spirit Gale to function a little bit more similar to Comet's Call. I think as it stands now, you're never going to see anybody using Spirit Gale. I don't see the value in it whatsoever. And you start seeing more Soul Pike and Vile Transference being taken, or just Flaming Weapon. Might be a better choice even than Spirit Gale, in my opinion, at this point. But definitely, if you're looking to take something like a Vampire Lord and Zombie Dragon in your list, I would recommend Vile Transference or Flaming Weapon as one of your top choices. If you're looking to take a Vampire Lord on foot, just a simple Vampire Lord, I would say top tier spells are going to be the current GHB spell Hoarfrost is really good on that unit. And if not, then I would recommend having a Blizzard attached to it, or if you really need to, I would take Soul Pike, but I think Hoarfrost, in my opinion, would be the top choice there. Okay, the spells of the Death Mages. Again, 3 to choose from. We'll go left to right. So we have starting with Fading Vigor. I see a little typo there already on the PowerPoint, but I'm not going to bother with it. So Fading Vigor is going to allow you to choose 1 enemy unit, and then you are going to subtract 1 from the attack characteristics of that unit's melee weapons to a minimum of 1 until your next hero phase. You're effectively reducing the number of attacks that unit is going to make. If you are able to cast it on a 9 or higher, you can subtract 2 from the attack characteristics rather than 1, to a minimum of 1. So if a unit has 3 attacks on one of their melee profiles, and you cast it on a 9 or higher, now they're down to 1 attack, which is great if you're really trying to minimize the attacks there. Prison of Grief allows you to select a unit, and then it gives them strike last. If you manage to cast it on a 9 or higher, it just doubles the effective range of the spell. It would have been great if it allows you to pick 2 units. I think I would have preferred that than doubling the effective range. But, strike last can be very powerful in the game depending on when you use it. And then Waste Away, which is going to be your top choice, number 1 choice every single time. It allows you to pick a unit within range, and you're going to subtract 1 from the damage characteristics of their melee weapon, and they are going to have -1 to wound. So that is really, really good. You're effectively, putting in 2 debuffs on that unit, which is great. And if you get it on a 9 or higher, you can effectively choose 2 different units within range to give them -1 to wound and -1 to their damage. So really, really powerful. If you're sort of wondering, what the tier order is for your Death Mage's spell, is you definitely want to take Waste Away. That's 100% given. You're going to have that. And then from there, I would go Fading Vigor, and then Prison of Grief last is my personal choice. Again, Prison of Grief does have play. I just feel like it's more situational than Fading Vigor, and then Waste Away is just absolutely amazing. It's a great spell. Okay, let's move forward. So something I want to do next is I'm going to go very quickly through the different bloodlines. I'm not going to go into in-depth analysis of the different bloodlines. I just kind of want to give you an idea of the theme of each bloodline, more or less, their playstyle. And the hopes of this section is to help you sort of narrow down, kind of like where your preferred playstyle might be. And it's also going to help you sort of select your purchasing order. Because I would hate for anybody who's starting out into a new army or just starting into the hobby fresh to go out really excited. You want to purchase your first models, you want to build them, you want to paint them, but you're not exactly sure, what to do or where to go. And then you end up buying a bunch of stuff that just kind of sits, on your shelf, and it's just money wasted and not really seeing playtime because, you don't like the play style, or they don't like coordinate or synergize well. So this is kind of like my attempt at shedding some light on that. Okay, so we'll start with Legion of Blood. This is one of my favorite, if not my favorite Legion. So Legion of Blood is effectively Neferata's faction. So she is going to be like the main named character for the for this bloodline. And Legion of Blood focuses on vampire heroes. So I know a lot of people are like, oh, Castelli, it's really heavy focus on vampire heroes. Yes, 100% agree. This one also has a good focus on vampire heroes and allows you to have more like death rattle units that count as battle line as well. So when you pick Legion of Blood, you're going to unlock Black Knights as battle line. So now you have a skeletal cavalry battle line option that goes to it as well. This Legion is great if you're looking to get more attacks and a little spellcasting bonus on your vampire heroes. And then Neferata itself is a powerhouse. And again, I'll try to do in the future like a bloodline in-depth video so we can really talk about different list archetypes and how we can modify different lists. But for the general idea is, if you like the idea of empowering your vampires to have better attacks, better spellcasting, and you're leaning more towards having more skeletal like infantry units or cavalry units in your army, this is definitely the faction that you want to look into. The next one is going to be Legion of Night. So this is Manfred's sub-faction. So he's the main named character for this bloodline. This one's going to focus on movement and ambush tactics. So Legion of Night has a lot of play when it comes to countercharging and teleportation. I would say it's definitely the most mobile of the bloodlines, just because of the amount of like trickery and stuff that you can accomplish. It unlocks Fellbats and Vargeist as battle line, which are great. Vargeist can deep strike anywhere on the board, so they're not reliant on the gravesites in order to join the fight, which is really good if you're trying to, play that sort of backline game and, sort of come in and like flank your opponent type deal. Fellbats are one of the fastest moving units in the entire Soulblight Gravelords repertoire, and they are also summonable, which is really, really good. So that means that you can, bring them in through grave sites. When they die, you can bring them back, and you actually bring back 2 bats because of the way that math works. You bring back half a unit rounding up. So you kill 3 bats, you get 2 back, which is really, really great. But definitely if you're one who's focused more in the movement game and countercharging and things like that, then Legion of Night is your go-to. Next, we have Castelli Dynasty. This is going to be Prince Vordry's sub-faction, and this is going to focus on Vampire Cavalry and powering up your Vampire units. So this is where you unlock Blood Knights as battle line, and this is your Vampire Cavalry. Blood Knights are great. They're fast, they heal, they do great damage on the charge, and then that's kind of it. They're a little bit overcosted, I think, right now for my taste, and I would love to see them treated a little bit more, I don't know, fairly, I think, in the points cost, so they could see a little bit more play overall. But the great thing about Castelli is that whenever your vampire units end up killing models in the opposing enemy units, they can gain specific buffs. So if you're really into the idea of like watching your own model sort of power up, get bonus to their movement, bonus to their damage, bonus to their wound characteristic as they sort of tear through the enemy army, then Castelli is what you're looking for. Okay, so then we have Virkos. This is going to be Belladama's sub-faction or bloodline. This is going to really focus, I would say, on Dead Walker units. It's going to have a MSU or multiple small unit or heavy horde army list. So if you're somebody who's looking to play an army that sort of fields a ton of undead models and just kind of swarms your enemy and really just sort of crushes their hopes and dreams as they watch you, push 160 zombies across a board and just kind of sit on objectives and then, watch them as they try to struggle to clear that for the next 2.5 hours, then this might be the sub-faction or bloodline for you. I mean, they have great synergies with their heroes. Model range is really, really great. So if you like, undead wolves and zombies and sort of bestial vampires, then this is really what you're looking for. As a side note, currently in the current meta, Virkos Dynasty is a ridiculously high winning bloodline. I think before the nerfs to Soulblight, because they did sort of increase the points on almost everything across our army. Virkos was sitting at like a 60-something% win rate. There's lists going around of 100 plus 60, 160 plus zombies, and it was just destroying anything it came in contact with. So a lot of wounds to get through, a lot of shenanigans happening. So I think it's still a very strong army list, but it's definitely going to be the more expensive, like I talked about earlier, not only financially, but time wise when it comes to building and painting and fielding the whole army itself. I also personally don't think it's a great playstyle for like enjoyment for you or your opponent. Just to sit there and watch somebody like push so many models across the board and you're just there like, okay. So it can lead to potential like BM or bad games and something like that. But that's my personal opinion. Maybe you have a different one, and that's totally okay. All right, our last bloodline, and kind of like the forgotten bloodline in a way, is Avangori. So this is Laukovai's faction, and it's going to focus on monsters. So if you choose Avangori, you're going to unlock Zombie Dragon, Terrorgeist, and Vargeist as battle line. So the thing with this, it has a great thematic feel to it. If you really think about it, it's just vampires who have succumbed to their bestial nature, and just become these horrifying creatures and are in the process of like metamorphosing. there's a word there, and I'm definitely not saying it correctly, but somebody out there will correct me, and I appreciate that. But just transforming into these horrendous, nightmarish monsters, right? I love the idea of Avangori, you know, having these huge monsters like infused with vampire blood and lineage just tearing through the field of battle. The problem with it is that it's not optimized, in my opinion. And, you know, as cool as it may be, and you're not somebody who cares about being too competitive in the meta, then I would definitely encourage you to pick this up. But if you're somebody who's looking to get into the game, for like, okay, I want to win, I want to go to tournaments, and I want to really progress. And I'm not saying you can't do it with this list. I'm just saying you're going to have a slightly harder uphill battle than other lists, but still great nonetheless. Okay, and then here's a really important part. So buying guide. So here, I want to just give my 2 cents on what I think would be a great starting point if you're somebody who currently owns 0 Soulblight Gravelord models and you want to start an army, but you kind of don't really know where to go. Before I say any of this, right, I want to emphasize that as with anything, you shouldn't buy an army just so you can win games, and you shouldn't play just so you can go to your local store and, you know, tear through everybody and be like, I'm the best ever. I think that just kind of breeds an environment where you're sort of setting yourself up to have a bad time. But I should always encourage you to follow the rule of cool. It should always be your number one priority. So you should buy what you think looks great. I mean, you're going to be spending a lot of time building and painting and putting this on the table, and you want to feel good about it. You want to see your army and be like, hell yeah, that looks awesome, and I'm excited to play. Doesn't matter if I win or lose. I'm just excited to be here and to enjoy the ride. So that's my first advice, and the strongest advice I can give anybody. The next thing I would say is you need to start slow and generic. I wish somebody would have told me this when I first started buying models. I definitely followed the rule of cool and just started buying things like, oh man, Manfred looks sick, and this Vampire Lord and Zombie Dragon looks sick, and this looks awesome, and oh, Radukar the Beast looks amazing. And I started buying all these different models without really realizing what I was doing, and I'd spend a decent amount of money before I realized, like, wait, these all kind of go in different bloodlines and don't really synergize too well into one army list. So then I had to sort of take a step back and then backtrack and sort of fill in, you know, to build the list that I was looking to build. So my recommendation, right, is that you start generic and then work your way towards a bloodline that has the models and playstyle that you like. So what I mean by that is this. Okay, if you're looking in a first place to get started, the best place I would suggest right now is the current Vanguard box. The Vanguard box is going to bring a total of 29 models. It has a generic Vampire Lord, 20 Death Rattle Skeletons, 5 Blood Knights, and 3 Vargeist. Now, all those units are not keyworded to one specific bloodline, which means that they can transfer across every single bloodline and gain the bloodline traits, which is really great. So these are generic units, right, within your army. The best thing about this, though, is that you're also getting a great savings, right, from buying this Vanguard box. So it allows you to save money, and you're also going to experience different types of playstyle feels for units within the game. So I'm going to run through this real quick, right? A Vampire Lord is a staple. You are going to have a Vampire Lord in 90-something% of the list that you build, if not 100% of the list that you build. Okay, there is a Vampire Lord. It is a great foot hero. It offers a great amount of utility. It's a spellcaster. Okay, it just synergizes really well with pretty much everything that you put together. Next are the Death Rattle Skeletons. Now with 20 Death Rattle Skeletons, you actually have 2 battle line units there, because a battle line unit of skeletons is only 10. So with that, you already have the unit requirements for battle line for a 10,000, for a 1,000, wow, not 10,000, for a 1,000 point army. You have 5 Blood Knights. That lets you sort of experience what a cavalry feel, right, would be like. You get to sort of play with that. And with Vargeist, you get to sort of work around the movement and deep striking, right, components of the different Soulblight bloodlines. So I think this box, as it stands right now, if you're able to pick it up on Amazon, or if your local store has a good deal on it, or if you're even just get it at the GW store at its MSRP price, I think it's still a decent buy. So I would start here 100% for sure. What I would add on to this is going to be a little bit trickier to find, but definitely a great deal if you're able to find it, and that is going to be the old Soulblight Gravelords Start Collecting box. Now, this one's going to be hard to find. I do not anticipate your local game store to have it, and if it does have it, I would highly encourage you to pick it up and buy it. This is one of the first things that I bought back when they were still available on like Amazon. They're no longer available on Amazon. I don't even think GW is making these anymore. Okay, so I bought one when it was still available, just because at that time I recognized, wow, this is actually a great deal. And then I got lucky and I was able to pick up a second one at a local game store in my area for $90, which I was like, yeah, this is a no-brainer. I'm picking it up. But this box is fantastic. Again, it brings a lot of generic units that you can field across all the different bloodlines. So it brings a White King on Skeletal Steed, 20 Graveguard, and then 5 Black Knights. Now, Graveguard are also one of those units that you might not use 100% of the time, but they're definitely utilized in a lot of lists. This is like your hardest hitting infantry unit. Graveguard are the definition of a glass cannon. 20 Graveguard hit really hard, and there's something to be feared, especially when you go against somebody who knows Soulblight and you tell them, hey, I have a unit of 20 Graveguard. They're like, okay, they're going to be cautious about that from the get-go. White King and Skeletal Steed and the Black Knights are great. They have a great new synergy now where they do a lot of mortal wounds on the charge, especially if you pair them together. And like I mentioned, the fantastic thing about these guys is that they are not keyword locked. So if you're able to pick up both of these boxes, you have enough models to play a very nice and very diverse number of lists within any Soulblight Gravelords sub-faction. Okay? Now, once you have these, and say you want to move a little further up, or if you can, find the original Start Collecting Soulblight Gravelords list, then here are a couple other options that I would suggest you pick up that are great value. That being the Regiments of Renown Vermort's Shamblers box. This is going to bring 20 Deadwalker zombies and a corpse cart. Again, great units to have in your Soulblight Gravelords inventory. The corpse cart is really good for buffing zombies and buffing your casters to give them +1 to casting. Deadwalker zombies are, even after their points increase, a unit of 20 at 150 points is still like a fantastic value, because you have to remember, you're not actually getting 20 Deadwalker zombies for 150 points. You're getting 30 Deadwalker zombies for 150 points. So still really good buy. A little bit difficult to find this one online as of the filming of this video. I couldn't really find it on Amazon. I think your local game store should have one, and GW's website might have some, but if you're able to find it, still a great buy. Now, I want to talk about 2 generic heroes that I also suggest you buy, sort of working your way up. One is going to be a Necromancer. So this is a singular model. It'll cost you anywhere from $15 to $18 depending on where you get it. Necromancer is going to be great because it's going to give you access to the lore of death mages. And if you end up purchasing the Vanguard box or the original Soulblight Gravelords Start Collecting box, or this corpse cart and Deadwalker zombie box, a Necromancer pairs really good with any of those. It's got a great synergy going on with it. It's also a fairly cheap hero model that you can get, and he is not keyword locked, so he can be placed in any single bloodline and still benefit from most of their battle traits, if not all of them. The second thing I would recommend is, if you're looking for a big hero centerpiece, is I would go with a Vengorian Lord. Now, some people would argue and say, well, why not a Vampire Lord on Zombie Dragon, and this and that? Well, the reason being is because a Vampire Lord on Zombie Dragon is way too expensive point-wise nowadays. And it can also be a very intimidating model to build and paint for somebody who is fairly new. A Vengorian Lord sits at 300 points. It is not keyword locked, so it can be placed in any bloodline and benefit from their allegiance abilities, and it offers you a cool looking centerpiece model that is a vampire, that is a spellcaster. It has the monster keyword, so you learn to use monstrous actions as needed. Okay. And it offers a nice diverse toolkit of abilities for you to use. So this is all sort of geared to get you started on your first 1,000 points in Soulblight. But again, you're not locked to one specific faction. So you can take any of these elements and put them in a Legion of Blood list and it'll work great. Legion of Night works great. Even Avangori, because you do have the monster in that Vengorian Lord. So he'll benefit from those allegiance abilities. So this is really where I would suggest anybody who's interested in starting Soulblight Gravelords sort of spends their money and sort of gets started. And I don't encourage you to buy all of it at once, right? You sort of obviously build up little by little, but this is definitely where I would go. And then from here, I would play a couple of games in the different sub-factions, see how they play. And then from there, build into purchasing the models within that specific bloodline. Maybe you really like the aesthetic of Belladama and the whole idea of these half wolf, half vampire hybrid models and the way that they sort of synergize all together, you know, and then you can go and start purchasing those. So this is my take on it. Now, with all that being said, I don't want to leave you high and dry, sort of figure out, you know, oh, well, how do I put all these guys together in 1,000 point starter list so I can go out and try, you know, my first game, or how would you know, sort of put this together? So I'll give you an example of two very simple lists that I would sort of encourage somebody, or I would, you know, sort of put together for somebody wanting to try out this army and say, hey, look, this is where I would recommend you test it out and see how you feel about it. The first one being a Legion of Blood list. This one's a little biased because I do love playing Legion of Blood. I think it's extremely good. But Legion of Blood offers really good synergy with the models that you're getting from these purchases. It also doesn't have, I think, overly complicated allegiance abilities that tend to be pretty straightforward. So the list that I would put together here would be a Vengorian Lord. I would make it my general with the Doom Minions trait, the artifact Cloak of Mist and Shadows. I would give it Vile Transference or Flaming Weapon as its spell, depending on, you know, whatever you prefer to have. But those are, I would choose between one of those two. Then I would have a Vampire Lord. I would give it Hoarfrost or Soul Pike, again, depending on your preference. I would probably lean more towards Hoarfrost. And then a Necromancer with Waste Away. From there, I would have two 10-man units of Death Rattle Skeletons. Those would be my battle line to meet my battle line requirements. And I would bring in one unit of Blood Knights. So this list is actually really great, in my opinion, because it offers, again, a lot of learning points for a new player, right? With the Vengorian Lord, like I mentioned, you have the spell casting, you have monstrous rampages, because it is a monster, so you get to sort of play with those and learn those as they go along. Okay, you have the Death Mage caster, so you can see how the Necromancer interacts with those summonable Death Rattle units. Okay, you have Blood Knights, so you get the idea of how cavalry would work and how, you know, sort of planning to deal more damage on the charge and things like that. So I think it's just a great starting list overall. The other list that I would sort of put forward is a Legion of Night list. And then this one, I would focus it more on movement and having a little bit more of battle line units sort of included in there. So the way that I would gear this one is having a Vampire Lord, and I would make it my general, giving it the Unbending Will command trait, and then picking between Hoarfrost or Soul Pike for its spells, whatever you'd like. Then I would have a second Vampire Lord, and for this one, I guess you would purchase, you know, another Vampire Lord separately. You could also pick up the Warhammer, I think it's Underworld's Warband that brings like 4 vampires in it, which forms its own Soulblight unit by itself. But I just use those as, you know, Vampire Lord models anyways. But regardless, you have a second Vampire Lord with the Morbeg's Claw artifact, so give it better spell casting, Hoarfrost or Soul Pike or Merciless Blizzard as your spells, and then Necromancer with obviously Waste Away, the best spell in Death Mage. 2 units of Death Rattle Skeletons, 1 unit of Bargeist, which would all form your battle line, and another unit of Blood Knights. So this list would focus obviously more on movement and teleportation. You would have those Vampire Lords, you know, providing assistance and sort of guiding the battle line units going along. You could very easily remove one of the Vampire Lords and then put in a Vengorian Lord in there as well if you have that. would still benefit from a lot of Legion of Night synergies. So, you know, that would get you going. The reason I chose Legion of Night for that second list is just to sort of provide you with the idea of like, okay, how can I work more movement? How can I teleport? Have the, you know, more of like the versatility when it comes to traversing the battlefield. I think these two are sort of a great idea of sort of where to start, especially because Legion of Blood and Legion of Night tend to be very popular lists that are in the meta right now, as far as like sub factions. So it's definitely getting you started, you know, in the right foot when it comes to like, you know, if you're looking for competitive play or whatever it might be. Okay, well, that's kind of it for this video. I really hope that if you're watching this, that you found it useful. Thumbs up and, you know, like it. I definitely want to see you guys comments below. Let me know what you thought. I've never done a video like this. I thought I would give it a shot and see how it goes. Again, I'm not a professional and I'm not like the best Soulblight player in the world, but these are just things that when I was first starting out, I wish that I had kind of like had somebody to guide me through and give me advice on, or things that I was like, you know, this is how I would help a friend if they were asking me advice on where to start, and to sort of break down, you know, the army for them and kind of give them an idea what it was all about. So again, if you found that useful, let me know. If you didn't find it useful, also let me know. Why not? All interactions, good interaction. If you want to see more videos like this, and if you're even interested in me doing like a bloodline specific, you know, like breaking down Legion of Blood into more specific detail, that's something that you're really interested in, and you want to know, okay, how do I start purchasing for a Legion of Blood list, or what are the core units that you would recommend for that, and how would I sort of start building it, and what are some variants of different lists that we can have, and things like that, then I would love to do stuff like that too. You could also do videos talking about like optimal gravesite placements and how to sort of use them better. I've been sort of looking into that a lot more as well, because I think there's a lot of depth that can be had with gravesites and how we place them in different battle packs and things like that. So all that would be great for me to know. So all right, well, that's it, and yeah, I'll catch you in the next one.